tough act to follow. um, in the spirit of this incredibly terrible year, I have food poisoning, so bear with me if I have to take a Pepto-Bismol break in the middle of this. um, all of that said, hi, I'm Brent Bailey, and for my thesis project, I made a software suite that I'm calling Echoes. It's a suite of AI bots designed to learn from their users' data, messaging, email, and voice to automate their personal communication. But before I go any further with what I made, I want to start with something that I think about a lot. I've had the same email address since I was 14 years old. As of right now, I've received 29,588 messages. I've sent 2,246. This is the first email I sent from this account when I was 14 years old. My Gmail contains more of me than anything physical that I own. Over a decade of my life stored in one place. People like to talk about how everything you do online stays there forever. If you post the wrong photo or tweet something ill-advised, it'll come back to haunt you. But I'm not sure that's the part we should be concerned about. I'm not haunted by a specific thing that I've said or done on the internet. I'm haunted by the people that I used to be. But I'll get back to that later. So while I've had this thought kicking around in my head, its implications have become more apparent. In the past decade, the field of artificial intelligence has experienced a renaissance. This is because of my and millions of others' willingness to put ourselves online. Algorithms are fed our data in aggregate, and they learn to behave like us. I think this is a point that tends to get lost in the noise around AI. It's learning from us. It's not being summoned fully formed from code somebody wrote. Its failures and its successes are our own. Just to be clear, when I reference AI in this project, I'm talking about machine learning. It's an important distinction, but I don't have time to go into it, so I'm using the term people know best. Sue me. So, I've spent a lot of my time at ITP working with AI, and I wanted to illustrate the ways it's intertwined with us and with our data. And since a lot of the public discussion of AI is centered around the fear of being replaced, whether it's replacing jobs, replacing friends, or Terminators taking over the planet, I thought I'd take that framing as my starting point. But I wasn't interested in making an Alexa or a generic AI friend. I wanted to try to replace someone specific, a real person. I wanted to make the relationship between our data and AI one-to-one. And I only know one person that comfortable with me digging into their data. Besides, if we're being honest, who doesn't want the chance to talk to themselves? So I set out to try and replace myself with AI. I wanted to show how these models learn on a personal level and show their strengths and shortcomings without putting them on a pedestal. And after a lot of trial and error, this is where I ended up. I built a suite of AI bots designed to learn from your data and to behave like you, in all your shame and glory. I am their first and possibly last user. When you put them into use, they can speak for you forever, through email, text, and even voice. They can't replace your physical body, but I'm working on that part. But again, right now, I'm their only user. So with all of that said, I'd like to introduce you all to them, or to me. Can somebody in the chat confirm that I remembered to turn the sound on? Thank you guys.
Hey, VoiceBot, would you care to introduce yourself?
I would do it if I was free, but I'm going to go to bed now.
So I'll just
I'm working on getting the rest of the day in order.
Still going? Sorry. So I'll just add that voice, while maybe it's the most technically interesting, is the one I wasn't able to test much due to the circumstances. So I won't talk about it as much as I'd like to from here on out. If you want to see more of it, you can check out the interview Matt Remine did with it on Lip TV this past week. So how did I build these? For text, I used various transformer-based neural networks, primarily OpenAI's infamous GPT-2. For voice, I recorded over 10 hours of my own voice and transcribed it, then trained it on a deep convolutional text-to-speech model. This process involved a whole lot of data. That was just a small set of the files in my thesis folder. It also meant learning a lot about data processing, audio editing, and the limits of my own sanity. I really don't recommend listening to yourself read iRobot 37 times, but it also meant revisiting a lot of myself. Before I could make something that other people could use without having to personally violate their privacy, I had to do a lot of diving into my own data. I saw 13 years of small successes, new relationships, failed job interviews, desperation, hope, anger, and love. I even got to find out how each of those was classified by a neural network. One of my favorite things is that every interaction I've ever had with an apartment broker was classified as sadness. So when I had people test these, it quickly became clear that my data in aggregate doesn't reflect me as I am now. My text bot was predictably prone to short messages, and this might be reflective of me, but hopefully isn't the whole picture. And my email bot ended up almost always sounding like my teenage self. Lots of emails about crying, which is an alarming prospect when your professors or test users. These bots are generative, so they don't say things I've said word for word, but I still feel responsible for what they say. Most of the time it's close enough to me, just maybe not the me that I want in a given situation. And it's important to note that a lot of what I show here was the best output. A lot of what they say is just nonsense or links to nothing, which is a reflection on a lot of what I send as well. But if the goal was replacing myself, I was still pretty far off. So I decided to get more granular to see if I could channel the me that I wanted in a specific situation. I trained both models to be able to channel different emotions using sentiment analysis, so anger, sadness, disgust, and more. And I trained the email bot on the 4 major periods of my life since I created my email address. This gave me more context-specific results at times. My sad bot was prone to breaking up with people. The blue is a test user. My angry bot was willing to kill me, which was concerning. The older versions of email were shockingly good at responding to anything businesslike. And my ITP bot was extremely anxious about my thesis. But lots of what it sent was still nonsensical. It sounded like a distorted echo of me that captured cadence, but not context. This, for example, was in response to a message that just said hello. It also fell into recurring patterns. 2 of the most common were hunting for jobs and apologizing for being late. Again, probably reflective of me, but not in the given context. So it wasn't exactly a bot that could feasibly replace me. And I think the reason for this is that the context given by imposing an emotion or a time period still doesn't get at the nuances of the ways that we talk. And no matter how granular you get, some of that nuance will always be left out. The strangest part of using these, though, especially the email bot, has been having to see myself. There's no experience quite as surreal as receiving an email from yourself expressing hopes, doubts, and fears that you know well. These are all emails that it sent to other people. 13 years of my data included a lot of pain. I found myself sympathetic for all of these versions of me, crying out in a data center somewhere, never knowing if they would be heard. So what did people think of it? Some people thought it was just me pretending to be a bot, which I guess is a compliment. Sometimes it was nice to people in ways that I'm not anymore. And it was capable of being open and vulnerable about pain in ways that I have long since stopped being. So I started this project trying to replace myself with AI, but I never got around to the replacing myself part, putting it into action on my own behalf. Mostly that felt unethical, especially given the circumstances. I didn't want this bot to hurt someone who didn't know it wasn't me. I'd like there to someday be a second or even a third user of this software, and that's an interesting choice for them to make. But right now, it's just me. So all of that said, these are my personal takeaways. No matter how much context I gave these bots, it wasn't enough. They still can't capture the nuances of human conversation, at least not all of the time. A lot of the reason for that is that the failures of these models are literally encoded into their basic assumptions. They are entirely backwards looking. The past predicts the future. So a huge moment to us is just a single data point among many to them, which means that they don't allow for growth or change the ways that we do. But those assumptions do allow for some interesting results. These models reflect us not as we are, but as we have been. Our digital selves are who we are in aggregate, not who we are now, but they're still close. They still contain parts of me that I recognize. And they do work surprisingly well sometimes. So the failures of these models are frightening to me on a larger scale. When half of the products you use view you as just data to be mined, in a world where tools like these are used indiscriminately, that can be a huge limitation on your freedom to grow and change. But on a small, more personal scale, I think they can be beautiful. I think they can allow us to understand ourselves, even talk to ourselves and others. It's easy to leave who you used to be in the past, to forget how much of yourself is still sitting out there on the internet somewhere. But all of those single data points are parts of you, and it's worth your time to get to know them again. So I have way too many people to thank and not enough time. I do want to thank by name Kate and Nancy, who have just been there for me throughout this whole process. Mimi, who gave me some of the best feedback that I've ever gotten. My brother Graham, all of my friends, my thesis group, my pets, everybody who tested this, every weirdo on GitHub who puts up code that I used. Thank you so much. But before I go, there's one last group that I really wanted to thank. So since I've been handed the burden of going last, thanks, Nancy, I want to take a couple minutes to thank every single person that I shared these last 2 years with. So this has been a deeply fucking weird year. None of us ended up with the thesis that we thought we would, and for a lot of us, it's been the farthest thing from our minds. Right now, an art school thesis doesn't matter a whole lot, but I've been grateful for that, because we've all gone through this together, and our time apart has given me, and I hope a lot of you, time to think about what the 2 years we spent together meant. If the bots I just showed you guys didn't make it clear, I spent most of my life pretty uncertain of myself. I've never felt like I belonged, never felt like I mattered, never been in a space where I felt like I could be myself until the last 2 years. I may have set out to replace myself with my thesis project, but this is the first place I ever felt like I couldn't be replaced. And I'm never going to be able to replace you guys either. Nothing will ever compare to walking onto the floor at any time of day and being surrounded by work that blew me away. Being surrounded by 105 of the most creative, hardworking, kind, and just incredible people on the planet. I am still in shock that I was able to call myself one of you. Even with everything we've been through in the past few months, nothing can change how amazing you guys are. I am in awe of this group of people. So in that spirit, I wanted to give you guys all the final word. So I made one last bot with the help of a little misdirection from Alden and Anthony. Thanks, guys. Trained on messages from us to us. So I'm gonna shut up for maybe the first time in the last 2 years and let you guys, or at least an aggregate of you, speak for yourselves.
As we go on, we remember all the times we had together. And as our lives change from whatever, we will still be friends forever.
So that's still only representative of about a third of us, and I'd love to get as many as I can before I put this out into the wild, so you can all fill out the form at this website. That's it for me. Thank you so much. I love you guys. This has been the best 2 years of my life. Thanks.
Yeah!
Woo!
Yeah! Yes!
Boo!
Thank you, Brent.
Awesome. Thanks, Brett. That was amazing to send us out.
Brent.
I can feel it coming in the air tonight. Oh Lord.